A family of three is having fun outdoors. Their son plays with a glider as his mother calls him over for a snack. Not feeling hungry, the boy skips the meal and follows the glider until it crashes into a cave. Just then, we see him screaming and running away from a swarm of locusts. They attack his parents and kill them alive, leaving the boy desperately in the family car. What makes the locusts so dangerous? This is Movie Shortens. Follow us today to a movie titled Locust, the Eighth Plague. Be aware, there are spoilers. The movie starts out with a white truck entering a facility called Silogen Research Center, located 15 miles from Prairie, Idaho. In one of Silogen's crop domes, there are a lot of bugs and corn. The purpose of the dome and bugs is to run a test on a genetically modified locust made by Gary Wolf and Ross Snow. These locusts have been designed to eat any pest that would ruin the crops. The locusts are set loose in the dome, and after a minute, a pheromone is released to lure the locust back out of the dome to a holding pen to see if they were successful. All the corn survived, and better yet, all the pests had been destroyed. It seems like the experiment was successful. Just as Gary and Ross start celebrating, an alarming goes off and alerts them that one of the vents was not closed all the way, and that it needs to be manually closed. A worker goes down to close the vent and reports that it's jammed. The locust then comes down and attacks the worker, and in a short amount of time, he is killed. Because the vent didn't close all the way, the entire swarm was able to escape. At a cornfield, a man named Hank tells his son Mike to go get some apples from field number 7. Mike agrees and drives off on his dirt bike. It's at this point another man named Colt, who owns an organics pesticide business, meets up with Hank and his wife Agatha to collect payment from their last spray. Although Hank complains the fee is a bit high, he has no other choice as Colt's spray formula help on their farm. Agatha tells Colt she will write him a check. Colt then departs and heads back to his home, where his girlfriend Vicky has burnt their dinner. Colt tells her that he hit 7 farms, and that all 7 of them do not need extra spraying, that their formula is working. Back at Silogen, some workers investigate the vents. They find the remains of the worker whose foot was eaten. Russ wants to inform the government that the locusts have escaped. However, Gary then points out that since the GM locusts have short lives and do not breed, they shouldn't worry too much. Over at Hank's cornfield, he is driving to combine harvester to harvest the corn when the machine stops. He radios over to Agatha that something is jammed in the blades. Hank goes out to investigate and finds the remains of a bull, almost eaten to the bone. Agatha then hears something in the corn and goes to find out what it is. She discovers Mike's bike and the partially eaten body of her son. Hank tells Agatha to sit tight and that he will come over in the combine, but finds it is covered in locust. As Hank tries to run away, he is attacked and killed by the locust. Not long after, Agatha is also attacked and killed. Meanwhile, in Prairie, Idaho, a family is having a picnic. A boy named Kyle follows the glider as it flies into a cave, where he discovers the locust. He runs away screaming, while the locusts pursue him. Kyle tells his mom that they need to run just as the locust attacks both father and then mother. In desperation, Kyle attempts to flee in the car until it crashes it into a tree. Colt has pulled up to the combine and discovers the bull's remains, and after a bit of investigating, finds the body of a locust and then the body of Hank. He immediately leaves to the medical hospital that Vicky works at. He tells her that Hank has been killed and that he thinks that locust killed him. Vicky says that there have been reports of cows being mutilated, and Colt wishes to see one of the bodies, but Vicky says only USDA can see it. With some convincing, Colt is allowed to inspect the specimen. Hank finds a locust instead of cow's mouth. They are initially skeptical, since locusts are herbivores, but analysis shows that this locust has tissue inside its stomach. Colt then concludes it must be Silogen, since before he left, he remembered Ross wanted to create a bug that eats other bugs. Colt takes it upon himself to see Ross in person, telling him that he had warned about the dangers. Ross denies the accusations, explaining that the locust will die in 2 days, and that it was all an accident. After Colt leaves, Ross informs Gary that Colt knows. Gary suggests covering their tracks to destroy all evidence of their experiment. If Colt comes back to the facility, he will kill him. Just as Ross is about to leave, he tells Gary that though he does not care what happens to Colt, he threatens Gary if anything happens to his daughter. This scene cuts to a state trooper named Anderson. While on patrol, he finds the car Kyle was driving is covered in dead locust and an unconscious Kyle. Anderson then breaks the window and takes Kyle out of the car. He then manages to get into his car just as the locust attacks his car. He outruns them and takes Kyle to the hospital. At a runway, USDA agent Greg Ballard meets Alex Price in a Black Hawk helicopter. Greg, who has made it to deal with the North African locust, is informed that there is now a bioengineering locust problem in Idaho. Greg is assigned to stop the spread of them. At the same time, Colt is driving and is unable to get a signal. He has to stop to use an emergency phone to call Vicky, informing that her father did create the locust. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Kyle and Anderson have arrived. The bodies of Kyle's parents have been brought to the hospital as well. They share the same death as the cows, which leads Colt and Vicky to see the boy. Colt goes to find Anderson, while Vicky stays with Kyle. Colt finds that Anderson's car is covered in locust and pulls the body of one of them off for investigation. He discovers that the locust on the car was a juvenile and that they have been breeding. Sometime later, Vicky and Colt meet Agent Greg as he touches down. While they drive to their destination, Greg is told that the swarm has mutated to reproduce. Colt tells them that they need to find the nest, which he deduces is near the place Kyle had been attacked. Later that day, Colt, Vicky, Greg, and a team search for the nest, which they find in the cave where Kyle's glider landed. The team then realizes this is where all the larvae are at. Colt then grabs some samples of the nest, and then the group sprays the nest with pesticide. The larvae die, but the adults do not, so they use flamethrowers, which only agitates the swarm. The team is then attacked, with most of them being eaten. Yet Gary, Colt, and Vicky survive. Later, Gary is on the phone with Alex and is told that they are allowed to use UD66, which is a military-grade pesticide that is extremely toxic. Back at the hospital, they debate where they think the swarm will nest next. A computer simulation predicts that in 96 hours, a sizable chunk of locusts will cover Idaho. According to Greg, he suggests the military has a pesticide called UD66, but Colt is against the idea, saying with UD66, not only will people and locusts die, but then nothing will grow for 10 years. Vicky, however, sides with Greg, and she will sign the order. No matter what Colt dissuades, she continues with her initial plan. While they figure out their next step, at an amusement park, the locusts have come and start attacking the people there. With some people trapped on their rides, they can't escape and are eaten alive. After the event of the amusement park, the group predicts that the swarm will come to Prairie unless they stop them. Greg suggests using a large number of livestock to lure them in and use UD66. Vicky demands a better option, and Greg compromises. He calls and orders the helicopters to be armed with UD45 instead. Sometime later, they had gathered the livestock and the helicopters approached the area. Meanwhile, Colt is still at the hospital studying his samples, attempting to bring down the idea of using UD66. He finds that not only pesticide doesn't work on the insects, but they become attracted to it. Realizing that Vicky is in danger, he drives as fast as he can to her. En route, he tells that not only are the locusts resistant to the pesticide, but it makes them stronger. Vicky immediately informs Greg about that, but at this moment, he cannot radio the helicopters. As the swarm is too dense for radio signals to make it, the insects then attack the helicopter, causing it to tail spin into the ground. With their mission a failure, Alex gets the permission of the President of the United States to use National Guard, which then enters Prairie. Back in the hospital, seeing the escalating problem, Greg argues with Colt about using UD66 as the final approach. Greg is determined, saying they have no options left. The National Guard armed with flamethrowers await the swarm and do battle but are quickly defeated. Back in the hospital, Colt reveals to Greg that he and Vicky only eat organic food. They don't have any pesticide chemicals in them, which is why they were not attacked. While the swarm attacked everything else, 0 organic farms had been attacked. Colt then says he must go to their airfield, saying he knows what might work. Seemingly convinced, Greg says he will hold off the helicopters back from Colt. Now at the airfield, Colt orders his organic pesticide to be loaded into a dust cropper. Fully loaded, he jumps into the cockpit and takes off, heading to the city. He then unloads the pesticide on the city, which kills all the locusts it comes in contact with. Greg calls off the helicopters, and Colt laughs joyfully. Back on the ground, Colt asks what happens next, with Greg saying there will be a cleanup and that they will go to Silogen after. The three are then horrified to see 2 more swarms of locusts heading to the city. With no more organic pesticide, Vicky and Greg head to Silogen, while Colt heads back to the airfield. Greg and Vicky enter Silogen to confront her father and ask to also speak to Gary, who has fled. Russ tells Vicky and Greg that he might have a solution. Meanwhile, as Gary attempts to flee, the swarm comes after him, and in little time kills him. Over at the airfield, Russ tells Colt that they plan to use the pheromones in the dome to attract them back, and once they have been returned, they blow up the dome. Colt agrees with the plan and is told to fill up the plane with the pheromone and bring the locust back to Silogen. With bombs placed in the dome, everyone evacuates from the facility. Colt flies the plane through the dome, and they shut the doors behind him, trapping the Locust inside. They attempt a remote detonation, but the swarm interferes with the radio signal. Greg suggests using the UD-66, but Ross offers to go back inside and detonate the device. Ross runs into the dome, and almost instantly is attacked by the Locust. He is able to arm the bomb, but at the last seconds, the bomb stops. With his last strength, Ross leans over and restarts the clock. The bombs completely level all of Silogen and kill the Locust. Now landed, Colt runs over to Vicky, telling her his sorry Ross died, and that it's finally over. Unknown to them, however, a semi-truck heading to Lafayette, Indiana is carrying live specimens of the same Locust to another dome. Like and subscribe to watch more videos like this, and don't forget to turn on your notifications. That really helps my channel. Thanks for watching!